As a Brit, I was a huge Davey Boy Smith fan. And how could I not be? Seeing one of our boys in such a prominent spot, alongside the likes of Hulk Hogan, Bret Hart, and the Ultimate Warrior, had me rooting for Davey and good old Britannia. Growing up during 90s England, there was no way you hadn't heard of this guy, and for good reason. In an era of wrestling where bigger was better, Davey Boy Smith had the best of both worlds. He could stand toe-to-toe with the giants of the WWF and WCW whilst also being able to throw down with the likes of Bret Hart and Shawn Michaels and have a great wrestling match. Smith's incredible athleticism and charisma made him stand out in the ring, and it was these characteristics that gave rise to his prominence in the 80s and 90s. Let's take a look at the career of the British Bulldog. Smith was born in Galborne, a working-class colliery town in Greater Manchester. His cousin Tom Billington, known as the Dynamite Kid, helped bring Smith into the world of pro wrestling. Smith started his training very early at the tender age of 13 and started competing on ITV's World of Sport when he was only 15, wrestling under the name of Young David. Showing obvious potential, Smith was spotted by Bruce Hart, the older brother of Bret Hart, who was scouting talent in the UK, and both he and Billington traveled to Canada to wrestle for Stu Hart. Both Smith and the Dynamite Kid were trained in Stu Hart's dungeon, and both became key wrestlers in Stu Hart's Stampede Wrestling promotion. It wasn't long before both Smith and Billington traveled to Japan and formed the tag team the British Bulldogs. They would compete in New Japan, Stampede Wrestling, and All Japan before moving to the big time when Vince McMahon bought out Stampede Wrestling. The buyout also meant they would be joined by Stampede Wrestling alumni Bret Hart and Jim the Anvil Neidhart, whom they would soon start a feud. Familiar with each other's styles, the British Bulldogs and the Hart Foundation were able to produce a series of show-stealing matches, which helped to elevate both teams within the WWF. This new and fresh style of tag team wrestling caught the attention of Vince McMahon, and he paired the Bulldogs against the Dream Team, which featured Greg Valentine and Brutus Beefcake. The Bulldogs wrestled the Dream Team for close to a year in losing efforts before finally becoming triumphant on the grand stage at WrestleMania 2. The Bulldogs would go on to have various rivalries as the tag champs, but most memorable were their feuds with the Hart Foundation and the Islanders. In 1986, the Dynamite Kid suffered a serious back injury in a match against Don Morocco and Bob Orton Jr., which would spark the beginning of the end for the Bulldogs. After dropping the titles to the Hart Foundation and following Billington's recovery, the Bulldogs would frequently be featured in matches which would end up in countouts or disqualifications. It was at Survivor Series 1988 where the Bulldogs would wrestle their last match for the company. Ironically, this was the first time I saw the British Bulldogs in action as a kid. Their participation in the 20-man tag match gave me a real taste of what the Bulldogs were all about. Dynamite Kid's explosive offense and Davey Boy's scary strength. I would later learn that the Bulldogs left the company after a dispute with the Fabulous Rougeaus, where an altercation over a gym bag led to Jacques, with the aid of a roll of quarters, punched Billington in the face, knocking out several of his teeth. Following a spell back in Stampede Wrestling and New Japan, Smith returned to the WWF in 1990, leading to a massive falling out between Smith and Billington. Billington found out that Smith had trademarked the British Bulldog moniker and was understandably upset at Smith choosing a singles career over their tag team. However, it was during his time as a singles wrestler that the British Bulldog would see his greatest successes. After being re-established in the WWF mid-card, Bulldog became a household name in my native England, due to the WWF being broadcast via Sky Sports, as well as various promotional tours in the UK. Noticing this increased popularity in the UK, Vince McMahon booked SummerSlam '92 in Wembley Stadium, in which Smith would main event the show against Bret Hart for the Intercontinental Championship. It was this match, in front of 80,355 fans, that Bulldog won the Intercontinental Championship from Bret Hart, in what is regarded as the finest match of his career. It has been well documented from various sources, including Bret Hart, that Bulldog was high on crack leading up to the match. Personally, I think it's amazing that the match turned out as well as it did, and I think a lot of credit should go to the Hitman for being such a ring general, that he was able to get a great performance out of the Bulldog under the circumstances. The Bulldog dropped the IC title to Shawn Michaels during Saturday night's main event in November and was then released by the WWF due to his alleged involvement in receiving human growth hormone from a pharmacy in England. After being fired from the WWF, Smith wrestled in various promotions including Eastern Championship Wrestling, WCW, All Japan, and Ring Wrestling Stars. He would wrestle Vader in WCW for the World Heavyweight title, which he won via disqualification. It's interesting to note that we would see this reoccur throughout Smith's career. He was close to being a top guy, even a champion, wrestling for the big strap, but he couldn't quite break through the glass ceiling. In retrospect, this makes sense from a business point of view. Smith was a great draw, especially in the UK and Europe, had the look and the ability at the time, but he wasn't reliable, like, say, Bret Hart. His substance abuse problems would have been a big question mark, and trusting Smith to represent a company as their top guy. Bulldog returned to the WWF in the summer of 1994 and immediately became involved in the ongoing rivalry between Bret Hart and his younger brother Owen. This storyline would culminate at that year's Survivor Series, where Davey was knocked unconscious by Owen, allowing Owen to take advantage of Bret's situation in his match against Bob Backlund. Smith would make a good showing at the 1995 Royal Rumble, being entered second, along with Shawn Michaels as the #1 entrant. Both were the final two participants, with Smith being eliminated by Michaels after celebrating prematurely, having believed he had eliminated Michaels moments before. From here he would form a forgettable tag team with Lex Luger, known as the Allied Powers. After the Allied Powers disbanded and aligning himself with Camp Cornette, Bulldog would receive a number of title shots. At In Your House 4 against Diesel, which he won via disqualification, and another at In Your House 5 against Bret Hart, and at In Your House 8 in King of the Ring against Shawn Michaels. For me, if I had to recommend one match to see featuring the British Bulldog, it would be his match against Bret Hart at In Your House 5. It was a great match, had a ton of drama, and featured Bret getting some serious color, a WWF no-no at the time. Smith would find tag team championship success once again, this time with his brother-in-law, Owen Hart, when they defeated the Smoking Guns. Smith also went on to become the first WWF European champion, winning a tournament which culminated in defeating his tag partner Owen in the finals in early 1997. Bulldog and Owen would become members of the Hart Foundation and go on to feud with Stone Cold Steve Austin as well as other American wrestlers. During his time in the Hart Foundation, Smith was involved in a number of high-profile feuds, one of my favorites being against Ken Shamrock, which culminated at SummerSlam '97. Smith lost the European Championship a month later to Shawn Michaels at One Night Only. Smith was originally booked to win in the main event against Michaels. However, Michaels convinced Vince McMahon that he should win, as it would create build-up not only for his impending rematch with Bret Hart, but also for a rematch against Smith at the next British pay-per-view. Smith reluctantly agreed. I remember being absolutely shocked at the result as I watched the pay-per-view live, and fans at the event, who gave Smith an ovation, voiced their displeasure by viciously booing Michaels and littering the ring with garbage as the pay-per-view went off the air. Shortly after, Bulldog left the WWF following the Montreal incident. For sure a turning point in Smith's career, I believe the Bulldog's career and life went into a tragic downward spiral from this point. Join me next time as we look into the downward spiral of Smith's career and his untimely death. This was Hogan's Choice. See you next time.